I will pay any price, even if the price is hiring the Alpha King himself. The words echoed through the grand hall of Blackthorn Kingdom, leaving every noble speechless. No one had ever walked into the royal palace with such a request. No one had ever looked at the most powerful alpha in the werewolf territories and offered him a contract. But Elena Whitmore was not there to seek attention. She was not there to challenge the crown. She was there because she had no other choice. The Omega Woman stood beneath the towering golden arches of the palace, holding the official document that contained the most unusual agreement the kingdom had ever seen. Across from her sat Alexander Blackthorn, the Alpha King known for his discipline, his authority, and his ability to keep emotions away from every decision. His expression remained calm as he looked at the contract in front of him. "You are asking me to become your personal protector?" he asked. Elena nodded. "Yes, Your Majesty." A quiet murmur moved through the court. The idea seemed impossible. The Alpha King was not a royal guard. He was the ruler of the entire kingdom. He commanded armies, negotiated alliances, and carried responsibilities that affected thousands of lives. Yet this Omega Woman had entered his palace and asked for his protection as if he were simply someone who could accept a job. Alexander studied her carefully. He expected fear. He expected hesitation. Instead, he saw determination. Elena knew exactly how unusual her request was. She knew many people would question why an Omega from Silverpine Pack would approach the Alpha King directly. But she also knew that the situation she faced required someone she could trust completely. "Why me?" Alexander asked. Elena took a slow breath before answering. "Because everyone else sees my situation as a problem to manage. You are the only person with the authority to keep me safe and the strength to make sure my voice is heard." Her answer surprised him. She did not speak about wealth. She did not speak about status. She spoke about trust. Alexander leaned back in his chair, considering the request. He had spent years protecting his kingdom, but he had never expected to become a protector because someone personally asked for him. "This is only a contract," he finally said. "My duty will be to protect you. Nothing more." Elena accepted his condition without hesitation. "That is all I am asking for." But neither of them understood that those words would soon become difficult to follow. Because Alexander believed this would be nothing more than another responsibility. He believed he could keep his distance, follow the rules, and complete the task like every other mission before it. He did not know that Elena was unlike anyone he had ever met. She was an Omega who had learned to stand strong in a world that often underestimated her. She was gentle but never weak, quiet but never invisible. Meanwhile, Elena did not know that the Alpha King who agreed to protect her had spent years building walls around his own heart. She did not know that behind the crown was a man who had forgotten what it felt like to care about someone without duty being the reason. As the contract received the royal seal, the entire kingdom watched in disbelief. The Alpha King had accepted the role of an Omega Woman's guardian. Everyone wondered why she needed him. Everyone wondered why he agreed. But the truth was hidden from them all. This was not just the beginning of a protection agreement. It was the beginning of a connection that would challenge everything they believed about power, trust, and destiny. The morning after the contract was signed, Elena Whitmore arrived at Blackthorn Castle to begin a new chapter of her life. She knew the agreement had changed everything. She was no longer simply an Omega from Silverpine Pack trying to protect herself. She was now under the personal protection of Alexander Blackthorn, the Alpha King himself. The thought still felt impossible. Yet as she walked through the massive stone halls of the castle, she reminded herself why she had made the decision. She was not there because she wanted luxury. She was not there because she wanted attention. She was there because she needed someone she could trust. Alexander, however, approached the arrangement differently. To him the contract was clear. He had accepted a responsibility, and he intended to complete it with the same discipline he brought to every duty as the Alpha King. "There will be rules," he told Elena as they stood inside the royal chambers. His voice was calm and serious. "Your safety comes first. You will inform me of your plans, and you will not place yourself in unnecessary situations." Elena listened carefully before replying. "I understand." Alexander expected her to argue. He expected questions. Instead, she simply accepted the conditions. That surprised him more than he wanted to admit. Most people who stood before him tried to gain something from his position. Elena only wanted security. As the days passed, Alexander began following Elena's routine. He expected to discover someone who needed constant protection. Instead, he found an Omega woman who was thoughtful, capable, and far more independent than he had imagined. Elena spent her mornings helping members of Silverpine Pack, who had moved closer to the kingdom. She remembered small details about people's lives. She listened when others spoke. She treated everyone with the same respect, regardless of their position. Alexander noticed something unusual. The people around Elena did not respect her because of her rank. They respected her because of who she was. One afternoon, while walking through the castle gardens, Alexander watched as Elena stopped to help a young family organize supplies for the colder season. She did not know he was observing her. She was not trying to impress the Alpha King. She was simply doing what she always did. "You spend a lot of time helping others," Alexander said when he approached her. Elena looked surprised. "Is that a problem?" she asked. He shook his head. "No. I was just wondering why." Elena thought for a moment. "Because everyone deserves to feel like they matter." The answer stayed with him. Alexander had spent years protecting the kingdom through strategy and authority. Elena protected people in a different way. She made them feel seen. For the first time, Alexander wondered if strength could exist in forms he had never considered. Still, he reminded himself of the contract. This was his duty. He was the Alpha King. He could not allow personal feelings to interfere with his judgment. But the more time he spent with Elena, the harder it became to view her as simply a responsibility. She was not demanding his attention. She was not trying to change him. She was simply showing him a side of the world he had forgotten. Meanwhile, Elena noticed something about Alexander as well. Behind the powerful title and the controlled expression was someone who carried every responsibility alone. She saw the exhaustion hidden behind his silence. She saw the person behind the crown. Neither of them spoke about it. Neither of them admitted that something was changing. But the agreement that began as a simple protection contract was slowly becoming something neither of them expected. The days that followed revealed something neither Elena Whitmore nor Alexander Blackthorne had expected. What began as a simple agreement slowly became a routine filled with small moments that changed the way they saw each other. Alexander continued to remind himself that he was only fulfilling his duty. He was the Alpha King, and Elena was someone under his protection. But every day brought another reminder that she was not the person he had imagined when he first accepted the contract. Elena did not need constant guidance. She did not seek special treatment. She carried herself with a quiet confidence that came from knowing who she was, even in a world that often underestimated her. One afternoon, Alexander accompanied Elena beyond the castle walls, as she visited a small village near the kingdom's border. He expected the trip to be ordinary. Instead, he found himself observing a side of leadership he rarely witnessed inside the palace. The villagers greeted Elena warmly. They smiled when they saw her. They trusted her because she had always taken the time to understand their struggles. Alexander watched as she listened to their concerns and offered thoughtful solutions. She did not speak like someone trying to gain influence. She spoke like someone who genuinely cared. "You know they do not see you as an Omega," Alexander said as they walked back toward the carriage. Elena looked at him with curiosity. "What do they see me as?" she asked. Alexander paused. He was not used to answering questions that required him to look beyond titles. "They see you as someone who matters." Elena smiled softly. "Everyone wants to matter, Your Majesty. Sometimes they just need someone to remind them." Her words followed him long after they returned to the castle. Alexander had spent years surrounded by people who measured importance through power, wealth, and family names. Elena measured it through kindness and actions. That difference continued to challenge everything he thought he understood. Later that evening, Alexander reviewed reports in his private study. He noticed something unusual. The documents from Silverpine Pack contained information that had been overlooked by previous advisors. Small details about families, resources, and community needs had been recorded because Elena had taken the time to notice them. She had gathered knowledge not because she was seeking recognition, but because she believed people deserved to be heard. For the first time, Alexander wondered how many voices had been ignored simply because no one powerful had taken the time to listen. Meanwhile, Elena began noticing changes in the Alpha King. He was still reserved. He still carried himself with the confidence expected of a ruler. But there were moments when the walls around him seemed lower. She noticed how carefully he listened during conversations. She noticed how he remembered details that others might forget. Behind the crown was a man who cared more than he allowed anyone to see. One evening, as they stood beneath the quiet lights of the castle courtyard, Elena asked, "Do you ever get tired of carrying everything alone?" Alexander looked at her, surprised by the question. Most people asked about his decisions. Few ever asked about him. "It is my responsibility," he answered. Elena nodded. Responsibility does not mean you have to forget you are a person. The words were simple, but they reached somewhere deeper than Alexander expected. For years he had believed that being a strong alpha meant never showing uncertainty. Yet Elena reminded him that strength did not disappear when someone allowed themselves to be understood. Neither of them mentioned the contract that night. Neither of them spoke about the growing connection between them. But for the first time, Alexander wondered if protecting Elena was truly the only reason he had agreed to stay by her side. The connection between Elena Whitmore and Alexander Blackthorne continued to grow in ways neither of them openly acknowledged. The contract that had brought them together was still written in official documents, but the distance that once existed between them was slowly disappearing. Alexander still carried the title of Alpha King, and Elena was still an Omega from Silverpine Pack, but when they were together, those titles began to matter less. What mattered were the conversations they shared, and the moments when they saw each other as individuals rather than roles they were expected to fulfill. One morning, Alexander invited Elena to attend a royal meeting concerning the future of several smaller packs within the kingdom. The invitation surprised many members of the court. An Omega woman had never been asked to sit among the kingdom's most trusted advisors. Some questioned Alexander's decision, believing that tradition should remain unchanged. But Alexander had learned something important. The people closest to a problem were often the ones who understood it best. During the meeting, several advisors presented plans based on reports and numbers. Elena listened quietly, noticing details that others overlooked. When the discussion ended, she carefully shared her thoughts. "May I ask something?" she said. The room became silent. "Have we spoken directly with the families who will be affected by this decision?" Her question was simple, but it changed the direction of the conversation. Alexander watched as the advisors considered her words. Once again, Elena was not trying to prove herself. She was not trying to challenge anyone. She was simply reminding them that every decision involved real people with real lives. After the meeting, Alexander walked with Elena through the castle gardens. The afternoon sunlight covered the paths, creating a rare moment of peace away from the responsibilities of the throne. "You realize you changed the entire conversation in there," Alexander said. Elena looked at him. "I only asked a question." He smiled slightly. "That is exactly what makes it different." Elena looked curious. "What do you mean?" Alexander stopped for a moment before answering. "Most people speak because they want others to notice them. You speak because you want others to notice what matters." The words surprised Elena. She had never thought of herself as someone special. She simply believed that people deserved kindness and attention. But Alexander was beginning to understand that this was exactly what made her remarkable. Later that evening, Elena discovered something about Alexander that few people knew. While reviewing old kingdom records, she noticed how many responsibilities he carried alone. Every decision, every expectation, every problem seemed to rest on his shoulders. "You do not always have to be the strongest person in the room," she said gently. Alexander looked at her. "The kingdom expects me to be." Elena shook her head. "The kingdom needs you to be wise. That is different." Her words stayed with him. For years, Alexander had believed that leadership meant carrying every burden without hesitation. Elena showed him another possibility. A true leader could accept support without losing strength. As the days passed, the court began noticing the changes between them. The Alpha King who once kept everyone at a distance was now willing to listen. The Omega woman who once arrived as someone seeking protection was becoming someone whose voice influenced the entire kingdom. But neither of them realized that their growing connection had attracted attention beyond the palace walls. Somewhere within the ancient records of Blackthorn Kingdom, a forgotten secret was beginning to awaken. A secret that would reveal why fate had brought an Omega woman and an Alpha King together in the first place. The ancient secret hidden within Blackthorn Kingdom remained unknown to most people, but its presence began changing the atmosphere around the palace. While the court continued discussing the unusual connection between Elena Whitmore and Alexander Blackthorn, neither of them understood that their meeting had deeper meaning than a simple protection contract. They only knew that something between them had changed. Alexander no longer saw Elena as someone he was assigned to protect. He saw her as someone whose thoughts mattered, someone whose presence brought balance to a life built around endless responsibility. Elena noticed the difference as well. The Alpha King who once seemed impossible to approach had become someone who listened, reflected, and allowed himself to see beyond his role. But the closer they became, the more questions appeared around them. Some members of the royal council believed Alexander was allowing personal feelings to influence important decisions. They worried that an Omega woman from Silverpine Pack was changing traditions that had existed for generations. Elena heard the whispers, but she refused to let them define her. She knew that respect could not be demanded. It had to be earned through patience and actions. One evening, Alexander invited Elena to the royal archives, a place where generations of Alpha rulers had stored the history of the kingdom. The vast library was filled with ancient books, forgotten records, and stories from the past. Elena walked through the shelves with curiosity, amazed by how much knowledge was preserved within those walls. "Most people come here looking for power," Alexander said. "What do you think people should search for?" Elena looked at the old records surrounding them. "Understanding," she answered. "Power without understanding can create mistakes." Alexander looked at her quietly. Once again, her words reached deeper than she realized. While exploring the archives, they discovered a collection of writings that had been sealed away for many years. The royal scholars had recently found references to a rare connection between an Alpha ruler and an Omega whose qualities could influence the future of the kingdom. The description did not mention wealth, status, or political importance. Instead, it spoke of compassion, honesty, and the courage to speak when others remained silent. Elena read the words carefully. "A prophecy does not decide who someone becomes," she said. "Their choices do." Alexander admired that answer. Even when faced with the possibility that destiny connected them, Elena refused to let an ancient record determine her value. She wanted to be respected for who she was, not for what others believed she represented. Later that night, Alexander stood alone in his study, thinking about everything that had changed since Elena entered his life. The contract had started as a duty, a simple agreement, a responsibility, but somewhere along the way, it had become something he could no longer describe so easily. Elena had challenged the way he viewed leadership. She had reminded him that protecting a kingdom was not only about strength, it was about understanding the people within it. Meanwhile, Elena wondered about the Alpha King as well. She had expected a powerful ruler who cared only about duty. Instead, she discovered someone who carried hidden loneliness behind his confidence. Someone who had spent so long protecting others that he forgot he also deserved understanding. As the moonlight covered the palace gardens, the ancient records remained open inside the royal archives. The forgotten words waited quietly, revealing that the bond between the Omega woman and the Alpha King was not created by a contract alone. It was something much older, something connected to trust, destiny, and a future neither of them could yet imagine. The silence inside the ancient hall felt heavier than the stone walls surrounding them. Sarah stood beneath the soft glow of the moonlit windows, still unable to understand what had happened. Moments ago, she had been the rejected Omega everyone overlooked. Now, every eye in the room followed her as if they were seeing her for the first time. Alpha King Kalen Ironwood remained beside her, his presence calm and unwavering. He did not look at her like someone who needed saving. He looked at her like someone who had always belonged beside him. Sarah lowered her gaze, overwhelmed by the sudden change. She had spent years learning how to become invisible, how to survive without asking anyone for kindness. Yet now, the most powerful alpha in the northern territories was standing between her and a world that had never valued her. "I do not understand," she whispered. "Why me?" Kalen's expression softened. For the first time, the cold reputation surrounding the Alpha King seemed to disappear. "Because when everyone else saw weakness, you saw a life that needed compassion," he said quietly. "When others walked away, you stayed." His words reached deeper than any title or promise could. Sarah remembered the lonely nights, the whispers, the moments when she wondered if the moon itself had forgotten her. She had never believed those small acts of kindness mattered. She had only done what felt right. Across the hall, the elders exchanged uncertain looks. They had spent years measuring worth through power, status, and strength. But now they were witnessing something they had never expected. A forgotten Omega had shown a kind of courage that could not be taught. Kalen turned toward the gathered wolves. His voice carried through the chamber, steady and clear. "A crown does not make someone worthy. Power does not make someone honorable. The heart reveals the truth." No one spoke. The same people who once ignored Sarah could not look away now. She felt the warmth of the Alpha King's hand gently guiding her forward. Not pulling her, not claiming her as property, but offering her a place beside him. For the first time in her life, Sarah did not feel like she had to prove she deserved to exist. She simply stood there as herself. Later that night, beneath the endless sky above the royal courtyard, Sarah watched the moonlight spread across the gardens. She still carried the memories of rejection, but they no longer controlled her. Kalen approached quietly, removing the weight of the royal ceremony from his shoulders for a moment. "You are still afraid," he said. Sarah gave a small smile. "Yes, but I am not running anymore." The Alpha King looked at her with quiet admiration. He had ruled through strength for many years, but this Omega had reminded him of something far greater. True strength was never about making others bow. It was about protecting what was precious. And beneath the silver moon, two souls who had once been lost finally began walking toward the destiny waiting for them. The morning light touched the royal gardens of the northern territories, painting the endless fields with shades of gold and silver. For the first time in many years, Sarah walked through those gardens without lowering her eyes. The whispers around her had changed. They were no longer filled with judgment or pity. They carried curiosity, respect, and a quiet disbelief that the Omega they once ignored now stood beside the Alpha King. But Sarah knew that acceptance from others was not the thing that mattered most. Deep inside, she was still learning how to accept herself. Kalen noticed the silence beside him as they walked beneath the ancient trees. The Alpha King, who had faced countless challenges with confidence, now moved with patience around the one person who never asked him for anything. "You are thinking too much," he said gently. Sarah looked up with a small smile. "I spent so long believing I was not enough. It feels strange to suddenly hear that I am." Kalen stopped beneath a tree where moonflowers bloomed even in the morning light. "Sarah, you were never less because others failed to see your worth." His words stayed with her. They were simple, but they carried the weight of a truth she had spent years forgetting. Before Sarah could answer, a royal messenger approached with a worried expression. The surrounding packs had gathered at the border of the kingdom, waiting for answers. Many had heard rumors about the Alpha King's chosen mate, and some questioned whether an Omega with no reputation could stand beside the throne. Sarah felt the old fear return, the fear of being judged, the fear of being seen as a mistake. But this time she did not hide. She followed Kalen into the great hall where leaders from different territories waited. The room was filled with powerful figures who had spent their lives measuring strength through rank and influence. Sarah remembered being the quiet girl standing in the corner, invisible among them. Yet now she walked forward with calm steps. One elder studied her carefully. "What makes you believe you can carry the responsibility of this position?" he asked. The question was not cruel, but it carried the expectations of an entire kingdom. Sarah took a slow breath. She could have answered with fear. She could have tried to prove she was stronger than they thought. Instead, she spoke honestly. "I do not know if I will be perfect, but I know I will listen. I know I will care. And I know no one should be forgotten simply because they are different." The hall became silent. Kalen watched her with pride, not because she had impressed the council, but because she had remained true to herself. The same kindness that others once called weakness had become the reason they could no longer ignore her. As the meeting ended, Sarah stepped outside beneath the wide blue sky. She realized her destiny was not about becoming someone else. It was about finally understanding that the person she had always been was already enough. Beside her, Kaylin stood quietly, knowing the kingdom had not just found a Luna. It had found a heart strong enough to change it. The days that followed brought a quiet transformation to the Northern Territories. The kingdom did not change overnight, but the hearts of its people slowly began to open. Sarah noticed it in the small moments. The servants who once avoided her now greeted her warmly. The young wolves who had been taught that power was everything began asking her about kindness, healing, and the courage it took to stand alone. She never demanded respect. She simply continued to offer the same compassion that had guided her from the beginning. In the royal library, beneath shelves filled with centuries of history, Sarah discovered old records about the Omega bloodlines. Many pages had been forgotten, hidden beneath stories that celebrated only warriors and kings. She learned that generations before her, Omegas had been healers, protectors, and keepers of balance within their communities. Their strength had never been measured by how loudly they fought, but by how deeply they cared. As she turned each page, Sarah finally understood something important. The world had not misunderstood her because she was weak. The world had misunderstood her because it had forgotten the value of gentle strength. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Kaylin found her standing beside the balcony overlooking the kingdom. The wind carried the scent of pine forests and fresh rain. "You are thinking again," he said with a soft smile. Sarah looked back at him. "I was remembering the girl I used to be, the one who thought she would always be forgotten." Kaylin stepped closer, his expression filled with quiet warmth. "That girl survived when no one believed she could. She was already strong." Sarah looked toward the light spreading across the kingdom below. For so long she had dreamed of being chosen. Now she realized something even greater. She had chosen herself first. The next morning, the royal court gathered beneath the great moonstone tower for a ceremony of unity. It was not a ceremony to prove Sarah belonged. It was a celebration of everything she had always carried within her. The elders, the clans, and the people of the kingdom witnessed the moment when the forgotten Omega stepped forward not as someone seeking approval, but as someone ready to share her heart with the world. Kaylin stood beside her, not above her, and together they looked toward a future built on understanding rather than fear. Sarah knew challenges would come. A kingdom was not changed by one speech or one moment. But she also knew that every act of kindness created a ripple, and every person who was once ignored deserved the chance to be seen. Beneath the endless sky, the Alpha King and the woman who had healed more than wounds began a new chapter. A chapter where strength was not measured by dominance, but by compassion. Where the forgotten could rise. Where kindness could become a legacy. And where two souls once separated by the judgments of the world, finally found the destiny they were always meant to share.